Cardinals Conversations presented by Purina Pro Plan and Worldwide Technology. And we get the chance to bring in my broadcast partner on the games, and that is Rick Horton. And Rick, it's exciting news when you think about the Edward Jones 2020 Cardinals Hall of Fame to see two teammates go in for you, and that is Tommy Herr and John Tudor, not to exclude Bill White, but he was a great member of the 64 team. But your two teammates, Tommy Herr, John Tudor, in a general sense, what's it mean to you to see those two guys go in?
Well, let me first say Bill White. I grew up in New York, so I listened to Bill White regularly as a broadcaster for Yankees baseball. So I feel like, I'm a fan of his even before I had the Cardinal connection and knew all about his great numbers. So congratulations to him. And, of course, he was the league president for a long time, so very well deserved. But the two guys that I played with, Dan, that is very special to me, that two guys that I care about, that I'm still friends with, get a chance to have this honor, and I feel like vicariously I get to enjoy it with them. I feel like when Ozzie went in the Hall of Fame, the National Baseball Hall of Fame, and when Whitey went in, I felt like a part of me had a joy from that I can't even explain it. But did I have anything to do with them going there? No. But I feel like I'm part of their lives and their friends. I feel the same way about Tom and John Tudor, both very deserving Cardinal Hall of Famers.
Tommy Herr was kind of the link of those 1980s teams that gets overlooked. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think he's understated in some ways. Tom is not a talker, but when Tom would talk after games, I talk about this a lot, he would kind of hold court and say, here's why we won, here's why we lost. And so when Tom would speak, everybody would listen. He knew the game, still knows the game, inside and out, knew all the rules. I've likened him to the Yadier Molina of those teams, where he just was like having another manager or another coach on the field. And Tom just did a lot of things right. And, his hands were incredible as a second baseman. And had Tom Herr not gotten hurt in the minor leagues, Dan, he might have been a 60, 70, 80 stolen base guy in the big league. We're talking about Vince Coleman and Willie McGee all the time as far as stolen bases. Tom Herr might have been in there had he not had all of his knee injuries, but still a dynamic player.
When you think of John Tudor, what comes to mind when you think of this great lefty that is the ERA leader in St. Louis Cardinals history?
Well, John, I think of pursuit of excellence. Everything he did, he wanted to do it as well as he could possibly do it. As a young pitcher, he threw 90. People don't know this, but when he was with the Red Sox, and he was a 13-game winner at Fenway Park as a young pitcher, he was throwing 92, 93 miles an hour. But by the time his shoulder went through all the things that pitchers' shoulders go through, he was throwing in the mid-80s, maybe max, and didn't have a great breaking ball. He was fastball, changeup, fastball at 85, changeup at 78. And, I saw him do things with that changeup, make people look silly, and he did it with such a perfectionism that I think was really his trademark. He threw, in that year in 1985, Dan, I don't know how many pitches total you throw in a year, but I'm going to say 98% of them were exactly where he wanted it to go.
Yeah, and go back to that year, 1985. If not for Dwight Gooden, he wins the Cy Young. So he starts out 1-7, then goes on this unbelievable run. What happened in that 1985 season that allowed him to click?
Well, I think in a couple of things about that. He was 1-7, but his ERA was 3.7, which is not great. But he was not getting a lot of support either. And you think about that. Let's say that we would have been able to win half those games. The team got off to a bad start, actually, in 1985. But he wins half those games. Maybe he does win the Cy Young because he ends up being a 25-game winner, 26-game winner. But during that streak, he had a high school teammate call him and say, you're doing something a little bit different with your delivery in terms of where your hands are and kind of where your motion is. And he made that quick change, and everything fell into place, like a golfer that finally gets his swing on plane. And he was just meticulously perfect after that. And he would come in. My favorite thing about John Tudor is that during that streak of going, whatever it was, 20-1, he'd come in after every warm-up session and say, I've got nothing today, got no chance of winning. Get ready, boys. And, of course, we weren't even wearing our spikes. We were wearing our turf shoes because we knew we had the night off. And sure enough, he would say he had nothing, and he would pitch a 88-pitch complete game shutout. 10 shutouts, by the way, for John Tudor that year. He the last guy to have 10 or more shutouts as a big league pitcher.
I think it's pretty amazing. Tommy Herr in that year has 110 runs batted in with only 8 home runs. That's unheard of, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're talking about a pennant-winning team, which is a big deal. You want to win the World Series, and we didn't. But that team was extraordinarily good. We were really close to each other, and back then, Dan, I think a fan of baseball history will know that in the '80s, and that is a ways back. But everybody's best hitter hit third. Now, Mike Trout doesn't hit third now, and that's not what people do anymore. They might hit second, you might hit third, you might hit first. But back then, everybody's best hitter hit third. Well, guess who was hitting third for most of that season for the Cardinals? It was Tommy Herr. Several switch hitters in the lineup, but he took advantage of the fact that the guys in front of him were pretty good players, could run the bases. He would take pitches and let them steal. They say that about Ted Sizemore and Lou Brock. Ted Sizemore might have hit 20 points higher had he swung at pitches early in the count and didn't give Brock a chance to steal. He'd say the same thing about Tom Herr. But once they got the second or third, he was incredible at driving them in.
But that was kind of the key with Tommy when you think about it. He gave himself up a lot for the betterment of the team, and that's something I think that gets overlooked a lot with Tommy Herr's career.
Yeah, and knowing Tom the way I know him, he was the word overlooked. We've said that a couple of times, but that is so him. I mean, when you think about those teams, obviously you think about the kind of the excitement of Vince Coleman and Willie McGee and the perfection at shortstop with Ozzie Smith. But you always talk about Smith and Herr, Smith and Herr, Smith and Herr. Well, Tom was almost the afterthought. Yet, I would say our team leader in many respects, and the guy that. When it came down to it, you wanted him at the plate to drive in the run. I mean, there were guys that could hit the ball further than Tommy Herr, no question about that. But you're talking about a consistent quality at bat where somebody is doing what the situation requires. He was great at situational hitting, and again, that's who you want when the game's on the line. And so I'm so happy for Tom because I know what it means to him, Dan, to be recognized. I feel the same way about John Tudor. John Tudor is recognized by Cardinal fans as being a tremendous competitor in the 80s. I don't know if he's had a chance to feel that yet, not living in St. Louis. So these are two out-of-town guys that are going to come back into town whenever we are able to do that. And I am excited to see the emotions that might come from these two guys based on the fan reception.
What do you think it means to Whitey? I know Whitey was really pushing for these guys to get into the Hall of Fame.
I think I think he's very, very happy about that. There's no question. Whitey's always thought that, there's some players in the 80s that maybe we missed. And I think the reality with this process of the Hall of Fame is, you're doing a little catch up because of when it started. And you certainly have the Hall of Famers in there, the Baseball Hall of Famers. They were kind of the natural. And then you kind of get the more recent favorites. And then you kind of reach back and get the favorites from the 60s and the 40s and the 20s. And you're doing your best to cover all those eras. But there was a time probably where the 80s were being overlooked a bit. And I think Whitey, to be able to see those guys in red jackets, he's going to feel like he's got his boys back on the field with him. And I'm looking forward to that moment.
What do you think the speeches will be like for both Tommy and John Tudor? John Tudor can be a little crusty now, so it can be a little fun.
I got to say, Tom Herr's a little crusty too. But I mean, both of them they're just not very they're stoic, both of them. I mean, in different ways. Tom is just kind of very stoic, and John is intellectually stoic, and they're just not. I know I heard a report of John was asked about what it feels like. He goes, "Yeah, it's good." I mean, I know he means more than that. I know he feels more than that. I know it's important to him, and again with Tom as well. Had a chance to text both of those guys, and they're honored to be in the Hall of Fame. They're not speech makers, either one of them, but I hope that a little bit of their passion and their personality comes out in this. And you're not going to again see a big presentation from either one of them because that's not their style. But I think they let their playing do the speaking for them.
And finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about baseball in 2020. What do you think? Do you think we're going to have it? And if we do, what's it going to look like?
I'm still very hopeful, Dan. And as the negotiations along the way have kind of been an issue, and there's all kinds of issues. There's issues with everybody going back to work, frankly. So it shouldn't surprise us that that's happening in sports and in baseball in particular, which is our world here. But I just think there are too many reasons. for us not to come back. That's what I'm standing on, and that's what I'm hopeful in. That fans want baseball, owners want baseball, players want baseball. Now, how you get there is of course the big trick and the big magic. But I think ultimately we'll get there because it's that important to each one of us that love the game.
Cardinals Conversations presented by Purina Pro Plan and Worldwide Technology. Ricky, great to see you. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon talking baseball. Thanks.
Can't wait, Dan. You bet.